Meryl Streep is the legend, the icon, and the woman who has ruled Hollywood for over 4 decades, with more Oscar nominations than anyone in history. But guess what? You would never believe the heartbreaking regrets and experiences she has had to deal with while working on certain film projects. Recently, Meryl just made a shocking confession about which movie in particular had her rethinking her entire career. And no, it's not one of her lesser-known films. So, what went wrong? Why does an actress of her caliber look back at this film with regret? Well, this confession will change the way you see Hollywood in general, so join us as we dive into the details. A role that almost never happened. Meryl Streep is definitely one of the most iconic actresses of all time. She has had a career spanning over 5 decades and has won multiple Academy Awards and Golden Globes, as well as the hearts of millions of fans. She has played everything from a ruthless fashion editor in The Devil Wears Prada to a struggling mother in Sophie's Choice. She can sing, she can cry, and she can make you laugh. There's basically nothing she can't do on screen. But even for someone as talented as Meryl, not every project turns out the way she hopes. And that's exactly what happened with the film she now regrets making. Well, Meryl just opened up in a shocking interview about the one film that still makes her cringe when she thinks about it. And it's none other than The Devil Wears Prada, the stylish comedy that most people remember as chic and entertaining. While it continues to remain a fan favorite, Meryl has made it clear that if she could go back in time, she would have never taken the role. Let's be real. Meryl's portrayal of Miranda Priestly in The Devil Wears Prada is iconic. Her performance as the icy fashion magazine editor earned her widespread acclaim and even an Academy Award nomination. However, behind the scenes, it wasn't all rosy, and you would never have imagined that Meryl had to face very severe challenges that led her to regret certain aspects of her involvement in the film. But do you know that Meryl Streep almost turned down the role of Miranda Priestly? Yes, you heard correctly. One of the most iconic performances of her career nearly never happened, and the reasons behind her hesitation are quite shocking. You see, Meryl may be one of the greatest actresses of all time, but even she wasn't immune to Hollywood's terrible habit of undervaluing women, especially older women. The first reason why she almost turned down the gig was because when the film's producers first approached her, she was shocked by how low their salary offer was. In her own words, the offer was slightly, if not insulting, and perhaps not reflective of my actual value to the project. Translation? Well, the producers lowballed her. And let's be real, this wasn't just any role. Miranda Priestly is in The Devil Wears Prada. The entire movie revolves around her, and yet Hollywood executives still tried to undercut her worth. At first, she was ready to walk away entirely, but then something unexpected happened. The studio panicked, and they quickly realized that no one else could bring Miranda Priestly to life the way Meryl could. So, they doubled her salary offer. And just like that, she was back in the game. However, even after the studio finally recognized her worth, Meryl still wasn't completely convinced. Why? Well, the truth is, she had already built a career playing deep, dramatic, emotionally complex roles like in Sophie's Choice, Kramer vs. Kramer, and The Bridges of Madison County. And now, she was being asked to play a fashion magazine editor? At first glance, the role didn't seem like the kind of meaty, Oscar-worthy material she was drawn to. To Meryl, it felt a little lightweight. And she wasn't wrong. You see, the original script was much more of a typical rom-com. Miranda was written as a cartoonish villain, just another mean boss with no real depth. But here's where things got interesting. Meryl had a vision. She saw great potential in Miranda, and she immediately knew that this character could be more than just a two-dimensional devil in high heels. So instead of walking away, she made a bold demand. If she was going to play Miranda, the character had to have more depth and feel real. And so, just like that, the script was rewritten for her. Another hesitation? Meryl wasn't sure this kind of movie would connect with her audience. Let's not forget that at this point in her career, she was already known for serious, dramatic films. Her fan base was used to seeing her in Oscar-winning performances, not stylish comedies set in the world of high fashion. Would her audience embrace this role? Would critics take her seriously? Let's just say it was a huge risk. And if there's one thing Meryl has always been careful about, it's choosing roles that push her career forward, not backward. But here's what ultimately convinced her. The challenge of playing a powerful woman without cliches excited her. It was a rare opportunity to redefine what a bossy woman looks like on screen. And she was also intrigued by the chance to work with rising stars like Anne Hathaway and Emily Blunt. So, despite her reservations, she took the leap, and we're glad she did. But that's not all. Would you believe that one of Meryl's biggest worries about playing Miranda Priestly was being too mean? Yes, she was afraid the character might come off as too harsh and too unlikable. Meryl didn't want Miranda to just be an over-the-top villain. She wanted her to be nuanced, complex, and human. So, in typical Meryl Streep fashion, she made a brilliant decision to lower the character's voice. Instead of playing Miranda as a loud, screaming boss, she went for a quiet, icy, devastatingly calm approach. And it definitely worked. Meryl's version of Miranda wasn't just mean, she was powerful. Her character was so intense that she could destroy someone with just a whisper. And honestly, that's what made her performance so legendary. Thankfully, Meryl trusted her instincts by accepting the opportunity, pushing for changes, and making Miranda Priestly her own. And the result, a $326 million box office hit, a Golden Globe win for Meryl, an Oscar nomination, and one of the most beloved performances of her entire career. Most importantly, she redefined how powerful women are portrayed in Hollywood. And though The Devil Wears Prada was nothing like the serious dramas she was used to, it became a career-defining moment. However, despite this success, it's still the one movie she regrets doing. Why? Let's break it down. Meryl Streep's reasons for regret. To truly understand why she has regrets, we have to go back to how she approached this role. If there's one thing we know about Meryl Streep, it's that she doesn't just act in a movie, she becomes the character. And when it came to playing the cold, commanding editor-in-chief, Miranda Priestly, she went all in. And we mean completely. Meryl decided to use something called method acting. Now, this is an acting technique where actors completely immerse themselves in their roles, even when the cameras aren't rolling, just so they would not just portray the character, they would be the character. This technique is pretty common in Hollywood. Heath Ledger did it for The Dark Knight and had to lock himself in a hotel room for weeks to develop the Joker's mannerisms. Michael B. Jordan did it in Black Panther to prepare for his role as Eric Killmonger. He isolated himself from the cast and crew to really tap into Killmonger's loneliness and anger. And after filming, he actually admitted that it was tough to shake off the mindset, and it got so deep to the point that he had to undergo therapy to help get back to himself. So when Meryl decided to really immerse herself in the character of Miranda the entire time she was on set, let's just say it didn't go pretty well. First off, she immersed herself in a character that was known for its icy demeanor, cutting remarks, and impossibly high standards. Well, it just meant that she wasn't joking around with co-star Anne Hathaway on set. She wasn't laughing with Emily Blunt, and she certainly wasn't having fun in between takes like the other actors. As a matter of fact, she later admitted that she felt completely miserable throughout the filming process. Speaking of her time on set, Streep simply said, "It was horrible. I was miserable in my trailer. I could hear them all rocking and laughing. I was so depressed. I said, well, it's the price you pay for being boss." Yikes! We love a dedicated actress, but was it really worth it? Because while the rest of the cast had a blast making this movie, Meryl was stuck in a completely different world. She went on to say, "I couldn't enjoy myself on the set in the way that I'm accustomed to, fooling around with everybody, because it just didn't serve the dynamic in the movie. If I kind of broke out of it and palled around with everybody. So I kind of stayed to myself and sulked." The other cast members also spoke about how much they enjoyed making this particular movie. Anne Hathaway, who played Andrea "Andy" Sachs, an aspiring journalist who lands a job as Miranda's assistant at Runway magazine despite having no interest in fashion, has gushed about how much she loved filming the movie. Hathaway says she had so much fun on the set, and it was a really great experience. However, she confessed that Meryl's acting got so intense and believable that she started to feel nervous and intimidated at some point. Can you imagine that? However, the good thing is that despite that initial intimidation, she felt somehow she could still feel the real Meryl, the loving and caring one, peeking through the character of Miranda. Hathaway opened up about a particular incident that happened on set, saying, "There's this scene where she says, 'You're just as disappointing as the rest of those silly girls.' And I remember when the camera turned on me, the pressure really got to me. And I'd had such emotional fluidity in the day up to that point. But it just wasn't there anymore. I remember having the experience of watching her watch me, and she altered her performance ever so slightly, and just made it a little bit different, and that brought more out of me and got me to break through whatever barrier I had." But Hathaway isn't the only one that had something to say about Meryl's character on the set. Emily Blunt even commented on how Meryl had to distance herself from the rest of the cast, saying, "She's amazing and was slightly terrifying in that film." She said it was one of the first times she's tried method acting, but it made her so miserable playing Miranda. Imagine that! You're in one of the most fabulous movies ever made, surrounded by stylish outfits and A-list actors, but you're completely alone and feeling miserable. And let's be real, who would want to feel that way? Well, it's no wonder she regrets it. After experiencing the emotional toll of staying in character as Miranda Priestley, Meryl had one major realization: she would never use method acting again. That's right, the Queen of Hollywood decided that no role, no matter how iconic, was worth that kind of suffering. She later admitted, "That's the last time I ever attempted a method thing." Now, before we all start panicking, let's be clear. Meryl doesn't exactly hate every single aspect of The Devil Wears Prada. As a matter of fact, she has actually confessed that she's quite proud of how the film turned out. It became one of the biggest movies of her career, and her performance as Miranda Priestley is still considered one of the greatest in movie history. But does she love the process of making it? Absolutely not. She regrets how she prepared for the role, how miserable it made her feel, and how it took away the fun of filming. It's kind of ironic, right? We all saw Miranda Priestley as this confident, untouchable fashion queen. But behind the scenes, Meryl was feeling lost and isolated. Well, this just goes to show that even the biggest stars have struggles that we don't see on screen. Other movies Meryl regrets making. Another movie Meryl completely regrets making is Julia, the 1977 drama starring Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave. Although this movie ended up being an acclaimed one, behind the scenes, her experience on the set was a total nightmare. One that left her so frustrated that she actually considered quitting acting altogether. First off, let's talk about that wig. If there's one thing Meryl Streep is known for, it's completely transforming into her characters. But in Julia, the transformation didn't exactly go as planned. Instead of crafting a look that helped her become her character, the filmmakers slapped a terrible wig on her that she absolutely hated. We're talking bad, distracting, unforgivable. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. Imagine spending hours perfecting a scene, delivering your lines just right, only to later find out that the editing team completely butchered it. That's exactly what happened to Meryl. She filmed a scene with Jane Fonda, an acting icon, only to discover later that the editors had ripped her dialogue from that scene and randomly inserted it into another one. Meryl was horrified. She wasn't just some extra in the background. She was a trained actress trying to build a career, and instead of respecting her work, the filmmakers chopped it up and rearranged it like it didn't matter. And the result was a completely disjointed, unnatural performance that made Meryl cringe. In a later interview, she didn't hold back about how much she hated the experience. She said, "I had a bad wig, and they took the words from the scene I shot with Jane and put them in my mouth in a different scene. I thought, I've made a terrible mistake. No more movies. I hate this business." But here's where the story takes a legendary turn. Instead of letting Julia ruin her career, Meryl pushed forward. And thank God she did, because just a year later, she landed her breakout role in The Deer Hunter, a movie that earned her her first Oscar nomination and officially put her on the path to becoming the most respected actress of her generation. But that's not all, because there's another movie that was so physically and emotionally draining that it made Meryl question her career choices. And it is none other than Robert Zemeckis' Death Becomes Her. Yes, you heard right. The 1992 dark comedy that gave us iconic special effects, campy brilliance, and Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, and Bruce Willis all in one film was actually one of the worst experiences of Meryl's career. And she did not hold back when she talked about how much she hated making it. According to Meryl, the filming process was a nightmare. And the biggest reason was because of the grueling, cutting-edge visual effects. You see, back in the early 90s, CGI was still in its experimental phase, and Death Becomes Her was the movie pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But this also meant endless hours of exhausting, frustrating, mind-numbing work for Meryl. And it's quite understandable, because back then, CGI-heavy movies weren't like today, where actors perform in front of green screens with motion capture suits. In Death Becomes Her, the visual effects team had to painstakingly position Meryl in exact ways to make sure the effects would work later. This meant long hours of holding uncomfortable poses, getting doused in weird liquids, and acting against nothing while the crew tried to map out where the CGI magic would go. And to make things even worse, she had to do multiple takes of everything, and it wasn't fun. Meryl has always been a dedicated, emotionally driven actress, but Death Becomes Her was not the kind of movie where she could fully immerse herself in the role. Instead of connecting with her character, she spent most of the time positioning herself for the shoot. For an actress known for deep emotional performances, Death Becomes Her was a total departure. And to this day, Death Becomes Her remains one of the only CGI-heavy movies Meryl has ever done. But do you know that these movies are the only time Meryl Streep has had a terrible experience on set? Well, it turns out that while filming a particular movie, Meryl had to endure a very terrible experience. This particular film pushed her to her absolute breaking point, and this got so intense and so emotionally draining that she almost didn't make it through. And the worst part? It wasn't just the role that made it tough. It was what happened on set, the behind-the-scenes drama, the shocking treatment from a co-star, and the emotional toll that nearly broke her. Meryl's worst on-set experience. You're probably wondering which movie put Meryl Streep through hell. Well, it was the 1979 classic that won her an Oscar but came at a steep price, Kramer vs. Kramer. You see, Meryl Streep is the picture of class, talent, and effortless grace. She's the kind of actress who makes everything look easy. But behind the scenes? This particular movie wasn't smooth sailing. During the time, Meryl had just lost her fiancé, actor John Cazale, to cancer. She was grieving, she was heartbroken, and she was still a young up-and-coming actress in Hollywood. But then came Kramer vs. Kramer, the movie that looked like it would change her career forever, and it did. But in reality, the process of making it was a complete nightmare. Her co-star, Dustin Hoffman, was a method actor, which is really just a fancy way of saying he took things way too far. Meryl was playing Joanna Kramer, a woman struggling with the fallout of a painful divorce. And to make her performance feel more real, Dustin decided to push her to the absolute limit in the worst ways possible. One of the most shocking moments was Meryl's very first scene in the movie. It was supposed to be an emotional one, but she had no idea just how far Dustin was going to take it. Guess what? Meryl claimed that during their very first take, he slapped her. And no, this wasn't scripted, and there was no warning. Meryl just walked into the scene, and before she could react, Dustin smacked her across the face. She was completely stunned by this move, but instead of lashing out, Meryl kept going, because that's just how professional she is. Years later, she admitted, "That was my first take in my first film, and he just slapped me." And you see it in the film. It was overstepping. Imagine walking onto a set for the first time, grieving the love of your life, and then getting hit in the face by your co-star without warning, and then having to just keep acting like nothing happened. But that wasn't even the worst part. As if physically assaulting her on set wasn't bad enough, Dustin reportedly went even further by weaponizing her grief. Meryl was still mourning the devastating loss of her fiancé, John Cazale. And according to sources, Dustin deliberately brought up John's name to provoke an emotional reaction from her. Think about that. She's already carrying unimaginable pain. And instead of respecting that, Dustin used it like some twisted acting technique to make her cry on camera. Many fans and critics have called this move extremely unprofessional and irresponsible. But Meryl, ever the consummate professional, powered through the terrible experience and turned that real pain into the Oscar-winning performance we saw on screen. But still, that doesn't make it right. Just when you thought Dustin couldn't push things any further, he pulled another dangerous stunt. During one particularly tense scene, Dustin reportedly suddenly slammed his hand on a table, shattering a wine glass into a million pieces right in front of Meryl. Again, no warning, no heads up, just glass flying everywhere. And Meryl? She barely flinched. Instead, she calmly put him in his place, saying, "Next time you do that, I'd appreciate you letting me know." Meryl suffered through the Kramer versus Kramer shoot in silence, pouring all that frustration, grief, and exhaustion into her performance, and the result was an Oscar-winning role that catapulted her into Hollywood royalty. But here's the kicker. Dustin Hoffman won Best Actor for the same film, despite his unacceptable behavior. Well, the good thing is that Meryl didn't let the experience define her. Instead, she took control of her career, refusing to ever be treated that way again. And like you already know, after that film, she went on to become one of the most respected actresses of all time, while Dustin Hoffman's reputation, let's just say, hasn't aged well. But The Devil Wears Prada may not be the last of Meryl Streep's regrets. Believe it or not, there are some huge roles that she turned down. Roles that ended up becoming massive hits, winning awards, and launching careers. Some of these missed opportunities still have fans wondering, what if? Roles Meryl turned down. One of the most jaw-dropping near misses in Meryl's career has to be Fatal Attraction. That's right, the film that gave us one of the most chilling villains in movie history, and can you believe that was almost Meryl's role? The role of Alex Forrest was originally offered to Meryl before Glenn Close stepped in and made it her own. Now, let's talk about what that might have looked like. Glenn Close did an incredible job, bringing a terrifying, almost animalistic desperation to the role. And of course, Meryl has that ability to play quiet intensity, the kind that would have made Alex even more unsettling. One thing is for sure. If Meryl had taken the role, Alex Forrest would have been a completely different kind of terrifying. But in the end, she turned it down, and Glenn Close gave us a performance that still haunts audiences to this day. Now, here's one that hurts: The Remains of the Day. If you love gut-wrenching, slow-burn period dramas, You know this movie is an absolute masterpiece. It's the kind of film that stays with you long after it ends, the kind that breaks your heart in the most beautiful way. And here's the thing, Meryl was supposed to star in it. While Emma Thompson was phenomenal and earned an Oscar nomination for it, the film remains a classic. There's no doubt that Meryl would have given us a completely different kind of heartbreak. But for whatever reason, she didn't do it. And the film went on to become one of the greatest period dramas of all time without her. Speaking of roles that could have reshaped cinematic history, let's talk about Thelma and Louise. This movie is remembered as the feminist masterpiece and the ultimate road trip movie that gave us one of the most iconic endings of all time. Before Susan Sarandon and Geena Davis stepped in and made this one of the most groundbreaking movies of the 90s, Meryl and Goldie Hawn were seriously considering taking it on. Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn even went to the production company, Pathé Entertainment, to pitch themselves as a pair. And while the director Scott found Hawn very funny, she was already a big star at the time, and they agreed she wasn't quite right for the part. Meryl, meanwhile, was wonderful but had a conflict with another project. Scott later revealed he had reservations that Streep wasn't tough enough to be Louise, whom she would have played. However, it's hard not to imagine their version of the film. Would it have been even more comedic? More tragic? Would Meryl's Thelma have been softer, more naive, making her transformation into a fearless outlaw even more powerful? Sadly, we'll never know, because instead of Thelma and Louise, the two of them ended up doing Death Becomes Her, a fantastic film in its own right. But let's be honest, we still can't help but wonder what we missed out on. And then there's Evita. This one is huge because Meryl didn't just consider this role, she really wanted it. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Meryl revealed that she was initially on board, learning all of the songs, which impressed the crew. But then, she dropped out. However, she quickly realized her mistake and attempted to get back on board with the project. But by that point, it was too late. Madonna stepped into her shoes. Meryl says she was upset when she realized she wasn't going to play Evita. She said, "It was a bitter disappointment, but it's just a movie." The movie ended up becoming one of the biggest musicals of the decade. It grossed $141 million and won an Oscar for Best Original Song. While it would have likely been another chance for Meryl to win, or at least be nominated for an Academy Award, during that period, she wasn't idle, and she earned success with performances in other projects. And finally, let's talk about the King Kong incident. This one isn't just a missed role, it's an insulting piece of Hollywood history that still makes fans furious. In 1976, Meryl auditioned for King Kong, but instead of treating her with respect, the producer mocked her to her face. Well, technically, he mocked her in Italian, assuming she wouldn't understand. He took one look at her and said, "Why do you bring me this ugly thing?" But it ended up being a huge mistake because Meryl speaks Italian, and she understood every word of that insult. But instead of breaking down or fighting back, she simply turned to him and said, "I understand what you're saying. I'm sorry I'm not beautiful enough to be in King Kong." Then, like the absolute queen she is, she walked away. The role ended up going to Jessica Lange. But let's be honest, who's had the last laugh? The producer who insulted her, or the woman who went on to become the most respected actress in Hollywood? At the end of the day, these roles might have slipped through her fingers and caused her a little bit of regret, but Meryl Streep's legacy remains untouched. If anything, the fact that she's still considered one of the greatest actresses of all time despite turning down these massive films only proves just how unstoppable she is. But what do you think? Was Meryl too hard on herself? Or were these movies really mistakes? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos.